Sorry, I was supposed to arrive last night, but my airline had a different opinion.
Je mi to ľúto, mal som totiž priletieť už včera večer, ale moje aerolinky ste mali na to trošku iný názor.
So, I'm a little bit spaced out. I'm kind of halfway between Dubai and Vienna at the moment. So.
Takže som ešte trošku space out, som tak niekde na ceste medzi Dubajom a Viedňou.
And unfortunately, I'm only here for, what, 2 days, 1 day and a half? Yeah, leaving on Friday morning. Yeah,
na nešťastie som tu iba na 1,5 dňa, odchádzam v piatok ráno.
So I apologize for that.
Za to sa ospravedlňujem.
I normally like to spend at least a few days.
Bežne rád strávim na jednom mieste aspoň niekoľko dní.
But anyway.
Ale tak či tak.
I'll do my best to say a little something in glorification of Srila Prabhupada.
Budem sa zo všetkých síl snažiť, aby som niečo povedal na oslavu Srilu Prabhupádu.
And I hope that will satisfy everybody.
A dúfam, že to každého uspokojí.
So, Srila Prabhupada, the living Bhagavatam.
Srila Prabhupada, žijúci Bhagavatam.
And those of you that have been to my seminars previously, you'll know that I have different topics or different subjects on that topic. And I normally ask the devotees to choose the particular topic that they want.
Takže tí, čo ste boli na mojich seminároch, tak viete, že mám niekoľko tém k tejto téme a bežne sa pýtam oddaných, aby si vybrali, ktorú tému chcú rozoberať.
And I actually can't remember which one I did last year.
A ja si nepamätám, ktorú som rozoberal minulý rok.
So, you can remember what I did last year?
You were not here last year.
O zdraví, vo
No, I went to Prednáška last year. Yeah.
Okay, Yudhishthir was there, maybe he remembers.
No, he wasn't there. Were you there?
Yeah, I was.
Zdravie sa to volá. O zdraví.
Minulý rok?
Áno, o zdraví.
Oh, devotee, she says that last year you were...
Anyway, if we can't remember what I did, then whatever I do now will be interesting.
Devotee remembers. She was there. She says that last year you were speaking about health.
Health? All right, well that crosses that one out.
Takže tu preskočíme.
All right, I've got cleanliness or living in the Dham.
Takže mám čistotu a život v dháme.
Cleanliness. I'm going to do cleanliness. No, it's definitely cleanliness.
Takže definitívne je to čistota.
We're supposed to be a Brahminical movement, so we'll do the topic of cleanliness.
Takže mali by sme byť brahmanické hnutie, preto si rozoberieme tému čistotnosti.
Is that all right?
Je to v poriadku? Tomorrow morning.
Well, let's see how we go with this. I mean, we're not going to finish the whole seminar in one evening, that's for sure.
Tento jeden seminár určite neskončíme za jeden večer, to je úplne isté.
So we'll see how we go.
Tak uvidíme, ako to pôjde.
Okay, so in English we say cleanliness is next to godliness.
Takže v angličtine hovoríme, že čistotnosť je hneď vedľa božskosti.
And that was one of Prabhupada's favorite sayings also.
Toto bolo jedno z obľúbených porekadiel Srilu Prabhupádu.
One such occasion was on December the 22nd, 1976.
Takže jeden taký prípad bol 22. decembra 1976.
This was on a car journey up to a place called Mahabaleshwar.
A bolo to na ceste autom na miesto, ktoré sa volalo Mahabaleshwar?
Mahabaleshwar.
Mahabaleshwar.
That's it's halfway between Bombay and Pune.
Je to na pol ceste medzi Bombajom a Punou.
Yeah. In the British Raj time, that was it's a hill station. It's like a mountain range.
Takže v období britskej nadvlády to bolo mesto niekde v horách.
And during the hot season, they'd all head up into the hills. Mahabaleshwar was like a spa, so they would go there and take, some refuge away from the heat and get rejuvenated.
A cez leto išli hore do týchto hôr, mali tam kúpele, aby si tam trošku oddychli od tej horúšťavy a takýmto spôsobom sa trošku tak ako omladili, oživili.
Yeah, since about the 1830s, so what's that, about 170, 180 years.
Takže to bolo v roku 1830, čo je asi taká 170-180 rokov dozadu.
So in Pune there was one family. They were one of our early life members in Bombay.
A v Pune žila jedna rodina, boli to jedni z tých prvých life members alebo životných členov v Bombaji.
So three brothers, the Malhotras.
Boli to traja bratia,
Malhotra.
Malhotra.
They own a company called Wakefield's. It's a very big food processing company.
Oni vlastnili veľkú spoločnosť, ktorá spracovávala jedlo.
And they're very, very wealthy.
A boli veľmi, veľmi bohatí.
So they had gotten some land, about 35 acres, which is what, about 15 hectares.
Takže mali asi 15 hektárov pôdy.
Up in Mahabaleshwar. And they had a small bungalow there, and so they decided they wanted to offer some of that land to Prabhupada.
Takže oni mali túto pôdu, tieto pozemky v tej Mahabalešve a oni sa rozhodli, že by tieto pozemky chceli ponúknuť Prabhupadovi. Mali tam ešte aj taký malý bungalov.
So they had, in the early 70s, they'd gone on a kind of a world tour.
Takže v roku 1970 išli na celosvetové karnevalové turné.
They went to Hawaii, they went to New York, they went to London, and everywhere they went, they saw our devotees out on the street chanting Hare Krishna.
Išli na Havaj, do New Yorku, do Londýna a všade, kam prišli, stretli našich oddaných, ako v uliciach spievajú Hare Krishna.
So they became very impressed. That was actually they had to go outside of India to see the Hare Krishna movement.
Spravilo to na nich veľký dojem, že museli ísť von z Indie, aby tam spadali Hare Krishna hnutie.
So they became very impressed when they came back. They contacted the devotees in Bombay and immediately became our life members.
Spravilo to na nich obrovský dojem a hneď ako sa vrátili z Indie, tak nakontaktovali našich oddaných a stali sa životnými členmi.
So they had read or heard about New Vrindavan and, you know, this idea of a rural community.
Takže buď čítali alebo počuli o novom Vrindaváne, čo je projekt s vidieckou komunitou, s pestovaním a chovaním.
So they thought it'd be nice if we did something like New Vrindavan in Mahabaleshwar.
Im sa páčila tá idea, že bolo by to pekné, keby sme niečo ako nový Vrindavan spravili v Mahabaleshwe.
So they invited Prabhupada to come up and see the property and spend a few days there.
Pozvali Prabhupádu, aby tam prišiel a pozrel sa na tie pozemky a strávil tam pár dní.
So on December the 22nd then we flew down to Pune.
22. decembra sme doleteli do Puny.
In those days it was a very small airport, not much bigger than this house.
V tej dobe to bolo veľmi malé letisko, nie o moc väčšie ako tento dom.
And it was just one of these little twin propeller Fokker planes.
Takže tam mohli lietať iba také tie malé dvojkolesové vznášadlá.
Nowadays if you go there, they've got a huge airport. The whole city's about 10 times the size that it was when Prabhupada visited.
Teraz keby ste tam išli, tak už tam nájdete obrovské letisko, je to asi 10-krát väčšie ako v dobe, keď to navštívil Šrila Prabhupada.
Yeah. So when we landed, two of the brothers were there. They took us to their house. Prabhupada had breakfast there.
Keď sme tam pristáli, tak nás tam čakali dvaja bratia, vzali nás do ich domu a tam sme sa naraňajkovali.
And then we headed off by car up into the hills.
A potom sme autom vyrazili hore do tých hôr.
So, you know, because it was a mountain range, so going up, it was like this for about 3 hours, just S-bends all the way back and forth, back and forth.
Takže keďže to bolo hore v horách, tak si to viete predstaviť, boli to také esíčka, ktoré trvali 3 hodiny tam a naspäť, tam a naspäť.
And it was the only time actually that I ever saw Prabhupada get disturbed by some physical condition.
Bol to jediný krát, keď som videl, že Šrila Prabhupada bol rozrušený nejakými telesnými podmienkami.
Because all the constant turning actually made him car sick. Yeah, there's a, you know, travel sickness.
Takže všetky tieto pohyby hore-dole mu spôsobili, že mu začalo byť špatne.
Going up, actually, we made it. I could see though that Prabhupada was quite, disturbed by it.
Videl som, že ako ideme hore, tak Prabhupada je dosť rozrušený.
And as it turned out, we only stayed there for that day and night.
No a keď sme tam už prišli, tak sme tam zostali len ten deň a ešte jednu noc.
And then the next morning, Prabhupada decided to return.
A nasledujúce ráno sa Prabhupada rozhodol, že sa vráti.
And instead of going back down to Pune, we went down the other side of the mountain range on the northern side, because that took us straight to Bombay.
A namiesto, aby sme sa vrátili tou kľukatou cestou naspäť do Puny, tak sme išli druhou stranou hore, kde bola priama cesta rovno do Bombeja.
And it was the same thing, constantly, every 100 meters, doubling back.
Ale bolo to úplne to isté. Všetky tie zákruty hore, dole, stále sa tak ako zdvojovali.
And Prabhupada, we actually had to stop the car. Prabhupada actually threw up.
A v skutočnosti sme jej museli zastaviť, Prabhupada sa vyvracal.
So it was, a difficult drive. And Prabhupada said, never again.
Bola to náročná cesta a Prabhupada povedal, už nikdy viac.
So anyway, on the way up, there was a bit of a conversation.
Takže tak či tak, cestou nahor sme trošku sa rozprávali.
And one of the brothers, he told Srila Prabhupada, he said, you know one thing.
A jeden z tých bratov povedal Srilovi Prabhupadovi, viete, jedna vec,
I have found that there is spotless cleanliness in your centers.
Ja som si všimol, že vo vašich centrách je nesmierna čistota.
Whereas in our temples here in India,
A zatiaľ, čo v našich chrámoch, tuto v Indii,
even you go to Haridwar or Rishikesh, all these places,
či už idete na Haridwar, Rishikesh alebo na všetky tieto miesta,
so the temples, the outer cleanliness, there's no proper emphasis given by the management.
a v týchto chrámoch manažment dostatočne netlačí na správnu čistotu.
And Prabhupada told him, he said, yes, he said, I stress on this cleanliness very much.
Prabhupada hovorí, áno, ja veľmi zdôrazňujem túto
If
čistotnosť.
they keep it unclean, I chastise them like anything.
A keď niečo majú nečisté, tak ich strašne skritizujem, vyhreším.
So they've learned this art.
Tak sa to naučili veľmi ako ťažkou prácou.
And I always say, cleanliness is next to godliness.
A vždy hovorím, čistota je vedľa božskosti.
Yeah, so there you go. Prabhupada used to chastise us if we were not clean.
Tak a sme tu, a Prabhupada on nás vždycky hrešil za to, keď sme neboli čistotní.
And I got chastised the very first night that I did some personal service for Prabhupada.
Mňa vyhrešil hneď tú prvú noc, čo som robil osobnú službu pre Srilu Prabhupádu.
This was on November the 26th, 1975 in New Delhi.
Takže bolo to v novembri 26. novembra 1976 v Delhi.
I had not actually quite taken up my service at that point.
A v tej dobe som ešte úplne neprebral túto službu.
I had been told to report onto the roof at noon when Prabhupada was taking his massage from Upendra to observe, how he was doing it.
Iba mi povedali, aby som prišiel hore na strechu, keď Upendra bude masírovať Srilu Prabhupádu, aby som si pozrel, ako to robí.
And then I was told to come back in the evening at about 9 o'clock to see how he did the evening massage.
A povedali mi, aby som sa potom vrátil o 9. večer, aby som sa pozrel, ako robí večernú masáž.
So I hadn't actually started the service, but I was on the verge.
Ešte som s tou službou nezačala, ale už som bol na prelome.
So I went, for Prabhupada's afternoon darshan.
Takže išiel som na Prabhupádov poobednejší darshan.
And then Harikesh kicked me out.
Potom Harikesh ma odtiaľ vyhodil.
And then I came back at 9 o'clock.
Vrátil som sa o 9. večer.
So when I came in, Prabhupada was in a kind of a very relaxed mood.
Keď som sa vrátil, tak Prabhupada bol v takej veľmi uvoľnenej nálade.
And it was a kind of a different atmosphere to what, we normally saw Prabhupada in.
A bola to iná atmosféra, v akej sme bežne ako vydávali Prabhupádu.
As much as I like this garland, It doesn't like me.
Takže veľmi sa mi táto girlanda páči, ale ona nemá rada mňa.
You made it.
Frank girls.
It's just marigolds make me sneeze.
Tie aksamietníky ma nutia kichať.
So before I start.
Takže kým začnem, tak sa zbavím.
So generally speaking, for most of the devotees, you know, seeing Prabhupada was a very formal thing.
Takže pre väčšinu oddaných, keď to povieme vo všeobecnosti, Prabhupada bol veľmi formálny.
We used to see him, you know, especially giving the Srimad Bhagavatam class.
Vydávali sme ho obzvlášť, keď dával prednášku zo Srimad Bhagavatamu.
If you were fortunate, you might get to go on a morning walk.
Ak si mal veľké šťastie, tak sa ti možno podarilo ísť na rannú prechádzku.
And sometimes you could squeeze into a darshan.
A niekedy sa ti podarilo sa vtlačiť aj do darshanu.
Yeah, but you know, the setting was always very formal.
Ale to nadstavenie bolo vždycky také veľmi formálne.
And that was how most devotees related to Prabhupada.
A väčšina oddaných sa takto aj k Prabhupádovi vzťahovala.
In fact, in 1982, I'd just been read the GBC for New York.
Takže v roku 1982 ma spravili GBC za New York.
So I thought, you know, I'll give the devotees a treat. I'll spend a few days and read from my diary.
Ja som si povedal, chcem oddaných potešiť a tam strávim pár dní a budem čítať z môjho diáru.
Because they didn't normally get to hear anything about Prabhupada.
Pretože bežne sa im nepodarilo počúvať nič o Prabhupádovi.
And of course at that time I had not started work on making my diary into a book.
A samozrejme v tej dobe som ešte nepracoval na tom, aby som svoj denník premenil na knihu.
So I just had, you know, the original diary notes.
Takže som mal iba tie pôvodné denníkové zápisky.
Anyway, so you know, for about a week I was giving, instead of the regular Bhagavatam class, I was reading from the diary and talking about Prabhupada.
Tak zhruba týždeň som namiesto lekcie z Bhagavatamu čítal svoj denník a rozprával o Prabhupádovi.
So after a few days, one of the leaders there in that region, Sri Rama Prabhu, he came to me.
A o pár dní jeden z líderov tej oblasti, Sri Ram Prabhu, k mne prišiel.
And he was quite disturbed.
A bol dosť nepokojený.
And he said, you know, when you read from your diary, he said, that really disturbs my mind.
A hovorí, keď čítaš zo svojho denníku, tak moju mysel to veľmi rozrušuje.
So I was surprised.
Ja som bol prekvapený.
I said, no, why?
Ja som povedala, nie, prečo?
So then he said, well, because the only image that I have and the only way that I've ever seen Srila Prabhupada is on the Vyasa-sana.
Pretože jediný obraz Prabhupádu, ktorý ja mám, jediný spôsob, akým som ho videl, bol Srila Prabhupada na Vyasa-sane.
And that's the way that I relate to him.
A to je spôsob, akým sa k nemu vzťahujem.
Now you're reading about things that are happening in the room and exchanges that you've had with him or that he's had with other devotees.
A teraz ty hovoríš o Šrilovi Prabhupádovi v izbe, o vzťahoch, ktoré mal s oddaným a o výmenách.
And I don't know how to deal with that.
A ja neviem, ako to mám spracovať.
He said, because I've never, you know, heard about Prabhupada in such an informal kind of way.
Pretože nikdy som o Prabhupádovi nepočul v takomto neformálnom spôsobe.
So it kind of disturbed his whole, you know, kind of relationship in one sense, or the way that he was relating with Prabhupada.
Takže ono nejakým spôsobom to rozrušilo jeho vzťah k Prabhupádovi, k tomu, ako on sa vzťahoval k Prabhupádovi.
Because 10 years later,
O 10 rokov neskôr,
Sri Ram was on with Purnachandra Prabhu. They were on what was then the official ISKCON censorship board.
takže v tej dobe bol Sri Ram s Purnachandra Prabhuom na oficiálnej v skupine oficiálnej iskonskej cenzúry.
It was called the ISKCON Review Board.
No sa to nazývalo, že taká iskonská kontrolná jednotka.
It was the ISKCON Review Board.
Takže bola to taká
It was the ISKCON Review Board.
takže
That's what the official name.
To oficiálne meno sa volá, že ISKCON Review Board.
But in effect, actually what it was a censorship system.
Ale čo to bolo? V skutočnosti to bol systém cenzúry.
That if anybody wrote a book
Že ak niekto napísal knihu
and they wanted it to be sold in an ISKCON temple,
a chcel, aby bola predaná v iskonskom chráme,
they had to get it reviewed by the board.
tak ju museli dať prečítať tej jednotke, tej skupine.
Yeah. So I was just coming out in 1992 with my first volume.
No ja som v roku 1992 vydával prvú časť môjho denníka.
So I gave it to Sri Ram and Purnachandra to do the review.
Tak som ho dal Sri Ramovi a Purnachandrovi, aby si ho prečítali, aby sa z neho prešli.
Yeah. So 10 years before, in 1982, he told me that he had found the contents to be very disturbing.
Takže pred 10 rokmi mi Sri Ram povedal, že to, čo počúva, ten obsah ho veľmi znepokojuje.
So now when I gave him the manuscript for the first volume, he read the whole thing.
Teraz, keď som mu dal rukopis k tej prvej časti, tak si to všetko prečítal.
And then he gave it back to me.
Vrátil mi to
And he was glowing.
a žiaril.
Yeah, he was full of praise, he loved it.
A veľmi to chválil, veľmi sa mu to
So
páčilo.
he said, now I understand.
A povedal, teraz tomu chápem.
So he was very happy. Anyway, just that was an aside.
Takže bol veľmi šťastný, ale to len tak ako som zabočil trošku.
So, you know, this particular night, the first night that I was told to report to Prabhupada's quarters,
Takže táto noc, prvá noc, keď mi povedali, že sa mám nahlásiť do izieb Šilu Prabhupádu,
that was a whole new experience for me.
pre mňa to bol úplne nový zážitok.
You know, Prabhupada was sitting, he was very relaxed, there was just his secretary, Hansaduta, and Hare was doing some cooking.
Takže Prabhupada tam sedel, bol veľmi uvoľnený a iba jeho tajomník Hamsadúta tam bol prítomný a Harikesh varil.
And Prabhupada was just kind of very relaxed and just chatting with them.
Prabhupada bol veľmi uvoľnený a iba čentoval.
So, you know, just to be part of that scene, Upendra was there also. Just to be part of that kind of scene was a whole new you know, level of Krishna consciousness.
Bol tam aj Upendra a bolo to úžasné ako byť časťou takejto úplne novej, ako takého novej scenérie.
So at around 9 p.m. Prabhupada finished eating a little prasadam.
Okolo 9. večer Šla Prabhupada dokončil to, čo prasadam, ktoré jedol.
Then he asked me to take his plate
Povedal mi, aby som vzal jeho tanier.
along with a basket of fruit that had been given to him earlier in the darshan.
A spolu s košičkom ovocia, ktoré mu niekto dal skôr ešte na daršane.
So the fruit was to be given to the deities for offering.
Takže toto ovocie sa malo dať božstvám, aby sa im to ponúklo.
And Prabhupada's plate was to be washed off and cleansed.
A Prabhupádov tanier mal byť umytý a utretý.
So I picked up his plate in one hand
Do jednej ruky som zobral jeho tanier
and I picked up the basket of fruit in the other.
a do druhej som zobral košiček s ovocím.
And I started for the door.
A vybral som sa k dverám.
But Prabhupada immediately stopped me.
Ale Prabhupada ma hneď zastavil.
He pointed out that the plate had been eaten from,
A poukázal na to, že z toho taniera sa už jedlo.
so it was dirty.
Takže bol špinavý.
I had picked it up, contaminating myself by touching it.
Ja som ho zdvihol, znečistil som sa tým, že som sa ho dotkol.
And then I had touched the fruit to be offered to the deity.
A potom som sa dotkol ovocia, ktoré malo byť ponúknuté božstvám.
He told me to put them down, go and wash my hands, and take the items separately.
Že povedal mi, aby som to zložil, umyl si ruky a vzal tie veci zvlášť.
So, from my point of view as a disciple,
Že z môjho pohľadu ako žiak,
Guru and God are to be worshipped on the same level.
guru a Boh majú byť uctievaní na rovnakej úrovni.
So what was foremost in my mind was that any little opportunity to render service to Srila Prabhupada was for my benefit.
Takže to, čo som si držal v hlave, bolo, že akákoľvek malá služba, ktorú môžem spraviť pre Šrilu Prabhupádu, je pre môj vlastný prospech.
And in other words, I thought that by taking Prabhupada's plate that he had eaten from, I was getting purified.
Inými slovami, ja som si myslel, že tým, že som vzal Šrilou Prabhupádov tanier, z ktorého jedol, tak som sa očistil.
But of course, Srila Prabhupada thought of himself as a humble servant of Krishna.
Ale samozrejme Šrila Prabhupáda nad sebou rozmýšľala ako nad pokorným služobníkom Krišnu.
So he saw the plate as being contaminated.
Takže on ten tanier videl ako znečistený.
So because he has such a high standard of purity,
Pretože mal taký vysoký štandard čistoty.
and because the fruit was to be offered to the deity,
Pretože to ovocie malo byť ponúknuté božstvám.
Prabhupada could not therefore accept the mixing of the two items.
Preto Prabhupada nemohol prijať, že by sa tieto dve položky zmiešali.
And it wasn't that I took them and, put them together either.
A tiež to nebolo, že by som ich vzal a nejak ich dal na seba.
Plates in one hand, the fruit in the other.
Ja som mal tanier v jednej ruke a to ovocie v druhej.
But according to Prabhupada, dirt is like electricity.
Ale podľa Prabhupádu špina je ako elektrika.
So, in Prabhupada's presence, it's becoming quite clear how little I have learned in the last 4 years in the movement.
V Prabhupádovej prítomnosti to bolo úplne jasné, ako málo som sa naučil v hnutí za 4 roky.
And being with Srila Prabhupada is opening up a whole new perspective on devotional service.
A mať možnosť byť so Šrilom Prabhupádom otváralo úplne novú perspektívu.
And I realized that as Prabhupada's assistant,
Ja som si uvedomil, že ako Prabhupádov asistent
you have to learn how to see things from his point of view.
sa musíte veci učiť sa musíte učiť, ako pozerať na veci z jeho pohľadu.
And that takes precedent over one's own. That comes before your own view of
A to
things.
má prednosť pred našim vlastným pohľadom.
This was actually similar later on, about 4 months after this, we were in Fiji, 5 months after. We had gone to Fiji.
O 5 mesiacov neskôr sme išli na Fidži.
And Prabhupada had a new secretary, Pushta Krishna Swami.
A Prabhupada mal nového tajomníka, Pushta Krishna Swamiho.
So he'd been on the party about 2 months at that time.
A v tej dobe bol s nami už asi 2 mesiace.
And when we got to Fiji, then, of course, it was very quiet. There were not many devotees there.
Keď sme sa dostali na Fidži, samozrejme tam to bolo veľmi také pokojné, nebolo tam ešte veľa oddaných.
There was a couple of local men, Vasudeva Prabhu. He and his brother, they had started building a temple for Krishna.
Bolo tam niekoľko miestnych oddaných a napríklad Vasudeva Prabhu, on a jeho brat začali stavať chrám pre Krišnu.
And during the daytime, they had vacated their house, and Prabhupada was staying in the house.
A cez deň opustili svoj dom, aby Prabhupada tam mohol zostať.
And during the day, there were no visitors, so it was very quiet.
A cez deň tam neboli žiadni návštevníci, takže to bolo veľmi pokojné.
And Pushta Krishna was there, staying in the house. Guru Kripa was the GBC, he was also there.
A bol tam Pushta Krishna, taktiež Guru Kripa, ktorý bol GBC.
So Vasudeva had made some arrangement for having some programs.
A Vasudeva, on to zariadil, aby boli nejaké programy.
So they called him in and they wanted to know where is Prabhupada going to be speaking.
Zavolali ho a chceli vedieť, že kde Prabhupada bude rozprávať.
So one program they had to drive to the other side of the island.
Takže jeden program bol zariadený tak, že museli prejsť autom na druhú stranu ostrova.
And another program actually we were supposed to fly to another island altogether.
A na druhý program sme mali letieť na iný ostrov.
So it's just like a half-hour flight. You go up and come down. That's best.
Polhodinový let, že len vzlietnete a už pristávate.
So as soon as Pushta Krishna heard that, he said, "All right, that's it. Cancel it. No way."
A keď to Pushta Krishna počul, tak povedal, nie v žiadnom prípade, zrušte to.
Yeah, this is too much inconvenience for Srila Prabhupada. You have to just cancel these programs.
A toto je príliš veľa nepohodlia pre Šrila Prabhupádu, musíte proste zrušiť tie programy.
So I could see that Vasudeva was quite disturbed.
Ja som videl, že Vasudeva je z toho dosť rozrušený.
Yeah, they'd made they'd already made the arrangements. They booked the halls. They'd advertised.
Oni to už všetko zariadili, oni už rezervovali tie haly a všetko to ako zreklamovali, spropagovali.
But they were quite heavy. They were quite heavy with it.
Ale oni na ňu boli veľmi tvrdí.
So I saw him coming out the room. I went over to him. I said, "Don't take any notice of them. You go and see Prabhupada personally."
A ja som mu povedal, vôbec si ich nevšimaj, choď a osobne sa stretni s Prabhupádom.
So he did.
A on to aj tak spravil.
And Prabhupada immediately, he became disturbed.
A Prabhupád i hneď začal byť rozrušený.
And then he called his secretary in GBC
A zavolal svojho tajomníka GBCho.
and then he said, now what's happening here?
A pýta sa, čo sa tu deje.
And Pushta Krishna explained, well, to go and do these programs, it requires so much effort, and we're just trying to, make sure that you're not inconvenienced.
Pushta Krishna vysvetlil, tak a na to, aby ste išli na tieto programy, to vám spôsobí toľko nepohodlia a my sa snažíme, ako aby to pre vás nebola záťaž.
So Prabhupada immediately told him, he said, at my age, just traveling is an inconvenience.
Povedal, a v mojom veku samotné cestovanie je už nepohodlie.
So he said, whatever programs the local men have arranged, you do.
Správte všetky programy, ktoré lokálni oddaní zariadili.
Anyway, as it happened, Vasudev did cancel the one where we had to fly to the other island, but the other ones we did.
Nakoniec to dopadlo tak, že Vasudev zrušil ten program, na ktorý sme mali letieť a ostatné sme spravili.
And it was a lesson for Pushta Krishna.
A bola to aj lekcia pre Pushta Krishnu.
Yeah, that because he had this mood of trying to provide protective relief for Srila Prabhupada.
Pretože on mal túto náladu, že sa snažil poskytnúť ochrannú úľavu pre Srilu Prabhupádu.
Yeah, he was the secretary, so a lot of the travel arrangements and everything had to be worked out with him.
On bol tajomník a mnohé z týchto cestovných plánov museli byť diskutované s ním.
And at that point, Prabhupada's health was not good.
A v tom bode ani Prabhupádové zdravie nebolo
And he
dobré.
had any number of ailments.
A mal niekoľko chorôb alebo potiaží.
Because he had diabetes, that was an ongoing condition.
Pretože mal cukrovku, to už bol prebiehajúci stav.
One of his kidneys was diseased, so he would get this uremia where his hands and feet would swell up.
Takže jedna z jeho obličiek bola chorá a preto sa mu tak opuchávali konce končatín.
He would get very high blood pressure.
Mal veľmi vysoký krvný tlak
He'd get heart palpitations.
a mal problémy so srdcom.
And in general, because he was 80 at that point, so, any kind of travel was difficult.
A vo všeobecnosti, keďže v tej dobe už mal 80 rokov, tak akékoľvek cestovanie bolo náročné.
So it was natural for Pushta Krishna to be in that mood, of trying to make sure that Prabhupada was not overly taxed or inconvenienced.
Takže samozrejme za týchto okolností to bolo úplne normálne, že Pushta Krishna sa snažil zariadiť, aby Prabhupada nebol príliš preťažený alebo zaťažený.
But the lesson that he learned was that you had to be in the mood that Prabhupada was in when he was touring.
Ale lekcia, ktorú sa z toho naučil, bola, že mal byť v tej nálade, v akej bol práve na tých cestách aj Prabhupada.
He was accepting the inconvenience for the sake of preaching.
Pretože on prijímal všetky tieto nepohodlia pre sankirtánové kázanie.
And therefore, sometimes we had to make arrangements that we knew would be detrimental to Prabhupada's health.
A práve preto sme niekedy museli veci zariadiť tak aj napriek tomu, že budú veľmi nevhodné pre Prabhupádové zdravie.
But because Prabhupada wanted it, then he had to do it.
Pretože to tak chcel Prabhupada, tak sme to museli spraviť.
So we were, sometimes in this kind of conflicted position.
Takže niekedy sme boli v takéto konfliktnej pozícii.
Yeah, that we wanted to look after Prabhupada. Our business is, the purpose of having a secretary and a servant, was so that it wouldn't be too difficult or taxing for him personally.
My sme sa mali o neho starať ako služobník a jeho tajomník sme mali dávať na to pozor, aby tie okolnosti neboli pre ňa príliš namáhavé.
But we had to make arrangements that we knew were actually not good for him physically, it was from his health point.
Ale museli sme zariadovať aj také veci, ktoré sme vedeli, že pre jeho zdravie sú vôbec nie dobré.
So I learned that the very first night.
A toto som sa naučil hneď prvú noc.
Yeah, just that simple lesson. The plate is contaminated, it's not going to purify me by picking it up, it's going to contaminate me.
Takže tu jednoduchú lekciu, že ten tanier ma neočistí tým, že ho zdvihnem, ale že ma znečistí.
Yeah. So then, the next night,
Ďalší večer,
after taking lunch, sorry, this is the next day, not the evening. After taking lunch,
ďalší deň, potom čo sme sa naobedovali,
Prabhupada was sitting at ease in his sitting room for a short period.
takže na krátku dobu sedel Prabhupada pohodlne v svojej obývačke.
Then he walked through the servants' room to get to his bedroom to retire for his afternoon nap.
A potom prešiel cez miestnosť služobníkov, aby sa dostal do svojej spálne, aby si oddychol po obednejším spánkom.
So Harisauri, Harisauri and I were in the servants' room.
Že Harisauri, Harisauri a ja sme boli práve v tých služobníckých komnatách.
Taking our lunch.
Obedovali sme.
So as soon as Prabhupada came in, we stopped and offered our obeisances.
Hneď ako prišiel Prabhupada, tak sme to prerušili a vzdali sme poklony.
And that again was the system. Whenever Prabhupada came into your presence, or you came into Prabhupada's presence, you offered your obeisances.
A to bol ten systém, že kedykoľvek ste prišli do prítomnosti Prabhupadu, alebo kedykoľvek prišiel on do vašej prítomnosti, tak ste všetko nechali a poklonili ste sa.
And again, when leaving, either he leaves or you leave, you offer obeisances.
A keď on odchádza, alebo vy odchádzate, tak znova vzdáte poklony.
So, we stopped, bowed down, offered our obeisances.
Takže sme sa zastavili, poklonili sme sa, vzdali sme poklony.
And I was eating my prasadam from a bowl with a spoon.
A ja som moje prasadam jedol z misky s lyžicou.
So, when I offered my obeisances, I sat back and still in a kneeling position and kind of sat on my ankles.
Takže keď som vzdal poklony, tak som sa posadil naspäť a stále som bol v tom pokľaku a sadol som si späť na pety.
And I put the spoon down in the bowl.
A lyžicu som dal naspäť do tej misky.
And I put my hands on my knees.
A ruky som si dal na kolena.
As soon as I did that, Prabhupada stopped.
Yeah. A hneď ako som to spravil, tak Prabhupada zastavil.
He looked at me, he said, he said you were eating and then? Like this. And he started putting his hand as if, like a small child, when they're eating, they kind of put it in their mouth and put it in their ear, they put it, it goes all over the place. So he started putting his hand all over like a small child, contaminating their clothing.
Takže on sa zastavil a hovorí, aha, tak ty ješ a potom si takto dávaš ruky a začal si ruky dávať všade po tele, ako keď malé dieťa je a jedlo má tu a tam a celé sa zašpiní.
So my instinct was to tell Srila Prabhupada, well, actually my hand isn't dirty.
Môj inštinkt bol taký, že som chcel Prabhupadovi povedať, áno, v skutočnosti moja ruka nie je špinavá.
Because I'm eating with a spoon.
Pretože jem s tou lyžicou.
But then I stopped myself.
Ale potom som sa zastavil.
I thought, no, Prabhupada can obviously see that.
A ja som pochopil, že Prabhupada to očividne vidí.
He just has a better understanding of what cleanliness actually is.
Ale má lepšie pochopenie o tom, čo je v skutočnosti čistota.
Prabhupada just laughed.
Prabhupada sa iba smial.
And as he walked past to go to the bedroom,
A išiel ďalej do spálne.
he shook his head, he said, you are all born malechas.
Potriasol svojho hlavu a povedal, vy ste všetci by ste brodení mlečovia.
Then again, the same evening,
A ten istý večer,
without first washing my hands,
bez toho, aby som si najskôr umyl ruky,
I picked up a jug of water after I had handled Prabhupada's plate.
a som zdvihol džbán s vodou po tom, čo som zobral aj Prabhupadov tanier.
Right. I did this in sequence, not at the same time.
Ja som to nespravil naraz, ale v postupnosti.
Yeah, Prabhupada told me, take the plate away, so I took the plate away.
Prabhupada povedal, vezmi preč plate, tak som vzal preč plate.
And he wanted a glass of water.
A chcel pohár vody.
So without washing first, I came back, picked the jug up,
Bez toho, aby som sa najskôr umyl, som sa vrátil a vzal som ten
and
džbán.
Prabhupada got me again.
Prabhupada ma znovu chytil.
So he told me the same thing, go and wash your hands.
A povedal mi tú istú vec. Choď a umyj si ruky.
Then he laughed and he told me not to mind.
Potom sa smial a hovoril, že aby som si z toho nič nerobil.
He said it is the position of the guru to find out the faults in the disciple and rectify them.
je úloha guru, aby vyhľadával chyby v svojom žiakovi a napravovali.
So it's simultaneously embarrassing and pleasurable to be on the receiving end of Prabhupada's chastisement.
Takže zároveň som sa cítil trápne, ale taktiež som bol rád, že som na tom príjme Prabhupádovho napravovania mňa.
His standard of purity is so much higher than ours.
Jeho štandard čistoty bol oveľa väčší ako môj.
By his keen observation and objective criticism.
A jeho dychtivou pozornosťou a objektívnou kritikou.
He is training us to the highest levels.
On nás trénoval do tých najvyšších úrovní.
To make us fit for serving Krishna.
Aby sme boli vhodní pre službu Krišnovi.
I feel very fortunate that Prabhupada is very patiently training me.
A ja som sa cítil veľmi šťastlivý, že Prabhupada ma tak trpezlivo trénuje.
Even though he sometimes calls us mlechas.
Aj keď nás z času na čas nazval mlečami.
He's actually very proud of his Western disciples.
V skutočnosti je veľmi hrdý na svojich západných žiakov.
He constantly points out to his visitors how we've been transformed.
A neustále on ukazoval návštevníkom, ako sme boli premenení.
And these incidents have also made me realize that Prabhupada has unlimited patience in training his disciples.
A aj tieto zážitky mi pomohli si uvedomiť, že Prabhupada má nekonečnú trpezlivosť v trénovaní svojich žiakov.
Although it must have given these instructions hundreds of times in the last 10 years.
Aj keď tieto pokyny musel dať už stovky krát za posledných 10 rokov.
He's still prepared to patiently teach the same things again and again to a new disciple.
Stále bol pripravený tie isté veci znovu a znovu učiť nových žiakov.
Provided the student has an attitude of humble service and is eager to learn.
Samozrejme, ak ten študent mal pokorný postoj a bol dychtivý sa učiť nové veci.
So that was another realization that I had right at the beginning.
A to bola ďalšia realizácia, ktorú som mal hneď na začiatku.
That there was no way I was going to be able to personally serve Srila Prabhupada without making offences.
Že neexistuje spôsob, ako by som slúžil Šrilovi Prabhupadovi bez toho, že by som spravil priestupky.
Yeah, I mean, considering my condition and Prabhupada's status.
Ak som teda zvážil vlastné podmienenie a postavenie Šrilu Prabhupadu.
Either knowingly or unknowingly, I knew I was going to make a lot of offences.
Či už vedome alebo nevedome, ja som vedel, že spravím veľa priestupkov.
So then that made me think, well, you know, what to do.
A rozmýšľal som nad tým, čo s tým spravím.
Yeah, if I don't do the service, then I won't make any offences.
Ak nebudem túto službu robiť, tak nespravím žiadne priestupky.
And I'll be safe.
Budem v bezpečí.
But then again, if I don't do the service, somebody else is going to do it.
Ale znova, ak ja nespravím tú službu, tak to spraví niekto iný.
And I really wanted to do it.
A ja som ju skutočne chcel robiť.
How to do it and how to cope with the fact that I was going to make offences.
Ako vykonávať tú službu, ako sa vysporiadať s tou skutočnosťou, že tie priestupky budem robiť.
And from the exchanges, I realized that if you're just very humble when you're doing your service,
a z tých výmen som pochopil, že ak ste veľmi pokorní, keď robíte svoju službu,
that actually protects you from the reactions of the inevitable offences that you're going to commit.
Tak vás to ochráni pred reakciami tých nevyhnutných priestupkov, ktoré spravíte, keď robíte tú službu.
Plus learning your lesson.
Navyše, že sa teda aj naučíte z toho svoju lekciu.
It's one thing to be humble.
Takže je to tá jedna vec, že máme byť pokorní.
But if you repeat the same mistakes again and again, your humility is not going to protect you.
Ale keď tú istú chybu robíte znova a znova, tak vás ani tá vaša pokora neochráni.
So be humble and be prepared to learn something as well.
Takže buďte pokorní a zároveň sa snažte naučiť niečo.
And then I saw if you have that attitude, Prabhupada was always very kind and considerate and very patient.
A ja som si všimol, že keď to robím, tak Prabhupada bol veľmi láskavý, chápavý a trpezlivý.
So the next time I got chastised for the same kind of thing actually.
ďalší krát, keď ja som bol pokáraný v skutočnosti za tú istú vec.
This was January the 4th, 1976. We were in Nellore.
Bolo to 4. januára 1974 in
Nellore.
Nelo, v Južnej Indii.
Nellore.
Nelo.
Nellore. N-E-L-L-O-R-E. Nellore. Anyway,
Nellore.
Nellore it's a city about 3 hours north of Madras, or Chennai as it is now.
Nellore je mesto, ktoré je vzdialené asi koľko 100 kilometrov od Madrasu?
And we'd done January 1st and 2nd, 1976, we'd flown down to Madras. Prabhupada did 2 programs there, very successful ones.
Takže 1. januára 1976 sme tam prileteli a Prabhupada tam spravil 2 veľmi úspešné programy.
And then the next day, on the 3rd of January, we travelled by train up to Nellore.
A ďalší deň, 3. januára, sme cestovali vlakom až do Nellore.
And Nellore was, in those days, about 300,000 people, not a huge city.
V tej dobe Nellore nebolo také veľké mesto, žilo tam asi 300,000 obyvateľov.
But there were 2 sisters there that were kind of the remnants of the former royal family.
Ale žili tam 2 sestry, ktoré boli pozostalé po kedysi kráľovskej rodine.
They were the Katamanchi sisters.
Boli to sestry Katamanchi.
Yes. And they had about 9 acres of land.
A mali asi 9 akrov pôdy.
So one plot was about 7 acres, that's about 3 hectares. It had a house on it, they were living there.
Takže na tom jednom pozemku, ktorý mal asi 3 hektáre, mali dom a žili tam.
And then the other 2 acres, that was kind of vacant.
A ďalšie 2 akre boli prázdne.
And they were offering both plots of land to ISKCON.
A oni oba pozemky ponúkali ISKCONu.
But the 2-acre plot we were going to get immediately, so we could build a temple.
Ten 2-akrový pozemok sme mali získať hneď, aby sme tam mohli postaviť chrám.
And then the agreement was supposed to be that the other 7 acres, they would remain there as long as they lived, and then when they died, then that land would come to ISKCON also.
A dohoda bola taká, že ten 7-akrový pozemok, že oni tam budú žiť, kým neumrú, a potom to tiež prejde na ISKCON.
So it seemed like a nice offer.
To vyzeralo ako pekná ponuka.
The devotees had been there preaching.
Oddaní už tam boli a kázali.
And Mahamsa Swami was kind of the main guy there.
A Mahamsa Swami bol ten hlavný líder tam.
And they had set it up for Prabhupada to come and do about 5 or 6 days of Pandal programs.
Oni pripravili, aby Prabhupada tam mohol robiť 5 až 6 dní pandalových programov.
And actually the Pandals were very good. We had about 6,000 people a night coming.
A v skutočnosti tie pandály boli ako dosť dobré. Bolo tam asi 5-6 tisíc ľudí, ktorí prišli.
And in the daytime the devotees were going out doing Harinam and making life members.
A cez deň oddaní išli von, spievali na Harináme a získavali nových životných členov.
And there was a lot of enthusiasm. People were fired up. They wanted to join up because ISKCON was building a temple there.
A ľudia boli veľmi nadšení, oni sa chceli pridať, pretože ISKCON tam mal postavať chrám.
So when we arrived, anyway, you know, we came there expecting, you know, the sisters would at least be enthusiastic. Prabhupada's coming to stay in their house.
Takže my sme tam prišli s tým, že sme si mysleli, že tie sestry budú aspoň nadšené z toho, že Prabhupada zostane v ich dome.
But when we got there, it was very strange.
Ale keď sme tam prišli, tak to bolo veľmi divné.
You know, we kind of stopped at the front gate. It was like a compound, and we stopped at the front gate and then walked down the drive to the house.
No a potom my sme tam ako zastali pred tou hlavnou bránou a išli sme pešo až do domu.
And the 2 sisters were there.
Boli tam 2 sestry.
But they were very subdued.
Subdued.
Like, you know, emotionless. They weren't smiling, they weren't, you know.
Takže boli tam tieto 2 sestry, ale boli také mrzuté, oni sa neusmievali.
Their whole, you know, kind of emotional state was very muted.
Takže celý ich emočný stav bol veľmi zmutovaný.
Muted, you know. suppressed.
Bol taký utlačený.
Yeah. And anyway, we didn't say much, but we got settled into the house.
Veľa sme si toho neporozprávali, uložili sme sa v tom dome.
And there was a little veranda next on Prabhupada's room, so I started giving him a massage.
Že vedľa Prabhupádovej izby bol malý balkónik, tak som ho tam začal masírovať.
So I was, rubbing his back with mustard oil.
A s horčičným olejom som masíroval jeho chrbát.
We heard this noise,
My sme začuli tento zvuk,
kind of a very familiar noise.
veľmi známy zvuk.
Yeah. Prabhupada looked up.
Prabhupada sa pozrel.
He said, "What is that?"
Hovorí, čo to je?
I looked across. I said, "It's chickens, Srila Prabhupada."
A ja som sa pozrel a hovorím, Srila Prabhupada, to sú kuratá.
So he said, "Oh, then that means."
A hovorí, a to znamená teda?
So I was trying to be optimistic. So,
Snažil byť optimistický.
so I said, "Well, at least it must mean that they're eating eggs."
Tak hovorím, tak pri najmenšom to znamená, že jedia vajcia.
So Prabhupada said, "Go and call him."
Hovoril, choď zavolaj.
Means Harikesh, because he was the cook.
Choď zavolaj ho. To znamenalo Harikeša, pretože on bol kuchár.
So by this time Harikesh had discovered also these people were meat eaters.
A už v tejto dobe to pochopil aj Harike, že títo ľudia sú mäsožravci.
And they had a because of their weird attitude,
A kvôli tomuto zvláštnemu postoju
he said, these people are crazy.
povedal, Prabhupada, títo ľudia sú šialení.
So Prabhupada got a bit annoyed with him.
A Prabhupadu trošku ako tak znechutil.
He said, "They are crazy or you are crazy."
A hovorí, oni sú šialení, alebo ty si šialený.
He said, "Well, okay." He said, "I may be crazy,
Hovorí, no už tak možno aj ja som šialený,
but these people are meat eaters."
ale títo ľudia sú mäsožravci.
So Prabhupada said, "Yes." So he said, "You cannot cook in their kitchen.
A Prabhupada povedal, áno, a preto nemôžeš variť v ich kuchyni.
Don't use any of their pots.
Nepoužívaj žiaden z tých
You
hrncov.
do everything separate."
Všetko rob zvlášť.
So we did that.
A my sme to robili.
Yeah. And of course we didn't say anything to the sisters because they were our hosts. It was just at the beginning of the program.
Samozrejme, tým sestrám sme to nič nepovedali, pretože oni boli naše hostiteľky a bolo to na začiatku programu.
Then on the last day we discovered actually it was a plot.
A posledný deň sme zistili, že je to pasca.
Yeah, because of the strange atmosphere, Prabhupada told Mahamsa and Gopal Krishna, who was the GBC at that time, that he wanted to see the deed of gift.
Takže kvôli tej divnej atmosfére Prabhupada povedal Mahamsovi a Gopal Krishnovi, ktorý v tej dobe bol GBC, že chce, aby videl ten dar, darovaciu zmluvu.
A deed of gift, the legal document, giving the land to ISKCON.
Takže chcel vidieť tú darovaciu zmluvu, že ten pozemok darujú ISKCONu.
So they didn't have it.
Ale oni žiadny nemali.
So they had to send to Bombay to get it down.
Tak museli ich poslať do Bombaju, aby to získali.
And in the meantime, we had 3 or 4 days of programs.
A zatiaľ sme mali 3-4 dní programov.
And the next day after we arrived, I think that was the day that we did, Prabhupada did the foundation stone ceremony.
A ďalší deň, keď sme prišli, tak Prabhupada spravil ten základací ceremoniál, keď ako kopali základy a robili tam.
Yeah, they did some big politician came as the chief guest.
Nejaký veľký politik prišiel ako hlavný host.
And there was, quite a decent crowd, about 500 people came.
A bol tam celkom slušný dav, asi 500 ľudí prišlo.
They put the Ananta Shesha in and
dali tam Ananta Šešu.
did all the pujas. Prabhupada went in the pit and put a couple of bricks.
Spravili všetky tie púže, Prabhupada zišiel do tej jamy a dal tam tie tehly.
And then he unveiled a marble plaque commemorating.
A potom odhalil mramorovú plaketu, akože na počesť.
Then on the last day, we finally got the deed of gift.
A posledný deň sme nakoniec získali tú darovaciu zmluvu.
And when Prabhupada read it, he realized this is a trick.
Keď si to Prabhupada prečítal, tak si uvedomil, že je to pasca.
Yeah, because there were all these conditions.
Pretože tam boli všetky tieto podmienky.
One condition was that we had to build a temple, a comparative religious studies library, and a meditation hall.
Takže jedna z tých podmienok bolo, že musíme vystavať chrám, meditačnú halu a knižnicu na štúdium komparatívnych náboženstiev.
And another condition was that if our construction was not completed within 3 years, they had the right to take back the land.
A ďalšia podmienka bola, že ak to nedostaviame do 3 rokov, tak majú právo na to, aby si vzali ten pozemok späť.
And give it to another charitable institution.
A darovať to ďalšej charitatívnej inštitúcii.
Such as the Ramakrishna Mission in Calcutta. Such as the Ramakrishna Mission
Ramakrishna Mission, okay.
in
Takže
Calcutta.
ako napríklad Ramakrishna Mission v Kalkate.
So there were several other conditions. As soon as Prabhupada read that, he said, "This is a trick. It's a plot."
Takže hneď ako si to Prabhupada prečítal, tak hovorí, nie, toto je taký trik, to je taká pasca.
Yeah, because the Ramakrishna Mission, whenever they build their centers, there's a temple, a religious studies library, and a meditation hall.
Pretože keď skupina Ramakrishna kedykoľvek stávala nejaký chrám, tak tam bol chrám, meditačná hala a knihovňa na komparatívne štúdium náboženstiev.
And they also have chicken farms.
A tiež mávajú slepačie farmy.
Yeah, because they're meat eaters.
Pretože sú mäsožralci.
And I had seen, when I'd gone for a walk around the property one day, the second day,
A keď som na druhý deň sa poprechádzal po tom pozemku,
they had all these tulsi plants.
tak som videl, že majú všetky tieto tulsi rastlinky.
I thought, that's nice, they've got tulsi here.
Som si myslel, to je pekné, majú tu tulasi.
But as I walked around, I realized that they were planted in alternating order.
Ale keď som tady išiel, tak som pochopil, že boli zasadené takým striedavým spôsobom.
Right, because there's a green tulsi and then there's a bluish tulsi.
Pretože je zelená tulasi a namodralá tulasi.
So the green one, Rama, and the bluish one, Krišna.
A zelená je akože Rám a tá namodralá je
So the
Krišna.
way that they were planted, it was going Ram, Krišna, Ram, Krišna, Ram, Krišna.
A tak tým spôsobom, ako boli zasadené, boli, že Rám, Krišna, Rám, Krišna, Rám, Krišna.
And when I walked around the corner of the house,
A keď som išiel poza ich dom,
they had a tulsi in a plant pot.
tak mali tulasi v takom čorepníku.
And they had sculpted, you know, like they do hedges and bushes into different shapes.
A oni ju, tú tulasi tak zostrihali, ako keď sa okrasné kryty strihajú.
And this tulsi was in the shape of a very familiar bird.
A táto tulasi bola v tvare veľmi známeho vtáka.
Chicken, of course.
Samozrejme sliepky.
At least it looked like that to me.
Aspoň teda mne sa to tak zdalo, že sa
Anyway, so Prabhupada surmised with all this information, because there was also one other thing, that when we entered the house the first day,
A keď sme vstúpili prvý deň do toho domu,
just in front of the entrance, there was a kind of a circle, because the driveway came in and then it went round in a circle, and in the middle of that there was, you know, some plants and stuff growing.
takže ten prvý deň, keď sme pošli na ten pozemok, na tú cestu, tak tam bol ešte taký ako keby okruh a v strede boli ako taký objazd kruhový a v strede boli zasadené rastliny.
And in the middle of that they had a figurine of Krishna.
A v strede mali postavu Krišnu.
But it was quite, you know, old, and, you know, the paint was peeling off.
Ale ako bol dosť taký starý a už sa odlupávala odtiaľ farba.
And although Prabhupada didn't say anything at the time, he noted it.
Aj keď v tej dobe Prabhupada nič nepovedal, tak si to všimol.
And then the next night when we were discussing about the weird kind of mood that these women had,
A ďalší večer, keď sme diskutovali o tom, akú zvláštnu náladu majú tieto ženy.
Tamal Krishna Maharaj brought it up that, you know, they're keeping the Murti of Krishna out in the open without protection.
A tam ale Krišna a Maharaj na to upozornil, že majú Murti Krišnu vonku bez toho, aby mal nejaké prístrešok.
Prabhupada said yes, he said it is aparad.
A Prabhupada povedal, áno, toto je aparát.
Yeah. Tamal had made the point that these people actually don't seem to be devotees.
A tam Krišna Maharaj teda poukázal na ten bod, že títo ľudia vôbec nevyzerajú ako oddaní.
Anyway, Prabhupada's conclusion was that these sisters actually were in league with the Ramakrishna sannyasis.
Takže Prabhupádov záver bol, že tieto sestry sú napojené na sannyasinov Ramakrishna.
He said, after all, he said, they're so-called sannyasis, they have no rules and regulations.
Povedal, nakoniec oni sú len tzv. Sannyasi, pretože nemajú žiadne pravidlá a usmernenia.
Yeah, so one sister was a widow, the other sister was unmarried.
A jedna z tých sestier bola vdova a druhá bola slobodná, nevydatá.
So he said that probably the so-called sannyasis are coming and taking advantage of them.
A povedal, že pravdepodobne tí tzv. Si tam prichádzajú a teda si nejak sa s nimi...
He said,
užívajú.
so he said, what that they'll do is we'll start building, then after 2 years, when most of it's constructed, then by some trick or another, they'll stop the supply of cement or somehow or another stop the rest of the building. Then when the 3 years is up, they'll be able to claim that we haven't fulfilled the condition. They'll take it back and then give it to the Ramakrishna mission.
Takže on povedal, že pravdepodobne ich plán je taký, že začneme stávať, za 2 roky to budeme mať takmer postavené, potom zariadia, aby sa prestal dodávať cement a na 3. rok nám budú vyčítať, že sme to nedostávali, vezmu si to späť a darujú to Ramakrishna misii.
He said, because they can't afford to build their own temples anymore, but ISKCON is growing, we're the only ones that are building big temples.
Pretože oni si už nemôžu dovoliť, aby stavali ďalšie chrámy, ale keďže ISKCON rastie, stavíme veľké chrámy.
Anyway, on the last day, then Prabhupada called the sisters in.
Takže tak, posledný deň zavolal Prabhupada tieto sestry.
He didn't confront them.
On ich nekonfrontoval.
He didn't mention anything about the contract.
A nič nespomenul o tom kontrakte.
But he just preached to them about giving in charity.
Iba im kázal o tom, že čo to znamená niečo darovať.
And he had me read the verse from the Bhagavad Gita about giving charity in the mode of goodness.
A chcel, aby som prečítal verš Bhagavad Gity o tom, ako sa daruje v kvalite dobra.
Yeah, the charity should be given without any thought for reward or return.
Že ten dar by mal byť darovaný bez akýkoľvek bez zámeru, bez toho zámeru, že by to ako malo byť potom vrátené, alebo že by si žiadali nejaký nárok na oslavu.
So, he was quite diplomatic about it.
Takže bol, čo sa týka toho, dosť diplomatický.
He wasn't going to make a big scene.
Nerobil tam veľkú scénu.
And he wanted to give them the chance, to come good.
A chcel im dať šancu, aby sa napravili.
So, as soon as we left, he told Mahamsa, now you preach to them.
A hneď ako odišli, tak povedal Mahamsovi, teraz im každý.
And you explain that we cannot go ahead as long as these conditions are in this.
A vysvetlím, že nebudeme v tom pokračovať, pokiaľ tieto podmienky sú v tej zmluve.
You withdraw the conditions, then we'll do it.
Ale ak dáte tie podmienky preč, tak do toho pôjdeme.
So Mahamsa tried negotiating.
Mahamsa, on sa s nimi snažil vyjednávať.
And I think 2 months later, when we were in Mayapur,
A myslím, asi o 2 mesiace, keď sme boli v Mayapure,
he reported that the sisters were flatly refusing to change the conditions.
A on teda nahlásil, že tie sestry absolútne odmietali zmeniť tie podmienky.
And he said all the people that had, become life members and were, so enthusiastic to get the temple up, they were getting very angry with the sisters.
No a povedal, že všetci tí ľudia, ktorým sme tak úspešne kázali a ktorí začínali byť natoľko nadšení, stávali sa s nich životní členovia, tak boli s tými sestrami, boli na nich veľmi nahnevaní. Ale stále oni nezmenili svoje stanovisko.
So Prabhupada told the devotees in Madras, that was Shravanananda and Baba Bhuti at that time. He said, you go there, you dig up the Anantashesha, you take the foundation stone, take it to Madras.
No, povedal, oddali im z madrasu, aby tam išli a vykopali toho Anantasheshu, aby zobrali tie kamene a aby to zakopali v madrase.
So they did it.
A oni to aj spravili.
That was it. And then 11 years later,
A o 11 rokov neskôr,
in 1987,
v 1987,
I was just starting to do, research work for my diary.
tak som začala robiť výskum pre môj denník.
So I thought, I'll go down to Madras, I'll go and visit that place.
A povedal som si, pôjdem do Madrasu a pôjdem navštíviť aj tamto miesto.
I just wanted to refresh my memory and get the details correct.
A chcel som si občerstviť pamäť a mať tie detaily správne.
So I went to the property
Tak som išiel na to miesto.
and I knocked on the door.
Zaklopal som na dvere.
No, nothing stirring,
Nič sa nehýbalo.
not a sound. I just knocked on the door again.
Žiadny zvuk, tak som znova zaklepal na dvere.
I knew somebody was in there.
Ja som vedel, že niekto tam
Yeah, but
vnútri je.
they were pretending that I weren't in.
Ale oni sa tvárili, že nie sú doma.
Then I just banged again.
Tak som znova zabuchal.
And then finally this man comes to the door
A napokon do dverí prišiel muž
and he starts berating me.
a začal ma vyháňať.
Yeah, you're from ISKCON, get off this property, don't come here.
Ty si z ISKCONu, vypadni odtiaľto, nechoď sem.
And I said, who are you?
Hovorím, kto si?
He said, I'm the driver.
Hovorím, ja som šofér.
I said, you're just a driver, you're ordering me around. I said, get out.
Hovorím, ty si šofér a ty mi dávaš rozkazy, choď z cesty.
I said, I want to speak with the sisters.
Ja sa chcem rozprávať s tými sestrami.
No, they won't speak to you.
Oni s tebou nebudú
I
rozprávať.
said, well, I'm not leaving till I've had a look around.
Ja hovorím, neodídem, kým sa tu nepoobzerám.
Well, all right then, but then you have to leave.
Dobre, ale potom musíš odísť.
So they were still in this mood, same, weird, inimical mood.
Že oni boli stále v tejto divnej, nepriateľskej nálade.
Anyway, so that was the background.
Takže takto bolo to pozadie.
Let's get back to the topic.
Keď sa vrátime naspäť k téme.
So when we arrived there, this was on January the next day, on January the 4th.
Takže keď sme tam prišli, to bol ďalší deň, 4. január.
So when preparing Prabhupada's lunch yesterday,
Keď sme včera pripravovali Prabhupádov obed,
I discovered that the only salt available
tak som zistil, že jediná dostupná soľ
came in large crystalline lumps.
bola k dispozícii vo veľkých skryštalizovaných hrudách.
That had to be broken down and crushed.
Že ju musíme roztlcť a rozumlieť.
Because it was somewhat troublesome.
No, keďže to bolo také ako problematické,
I spent half an hour making enough for what I thought would be the next few days.
tak som pol hodinu robil niečo, od čoho som očakával, že nám postačí na pár ďalších dní.
And I put it all in a small stone bowl.
A všetko som to dal do malej kamennej nádoby.
And I put that on Prabhupada's chunky table for eating.
A ja som to položil na Prabhupádov stolík na jedenie.
So I assumed, because this is again a Western habit, I assumed that with the salt pot there, Prabhupada would take what he needed, sprinkle it on his food and eat.
No a ja som s tým tak plánoval, že samozrejme je to naša západná nálada, že Prabhupada, keď bude jesť, tak si odtiaľ zoberie, koľko chce, posolí, koľko treba.
And then leave the rest for the next meal.
A že zvyšok nechá na ďalšie jedlo.
During breakfast, however,
Avšak pri raňajkách
Prabhupada started dipping pieces of fruit directly into the salt bowl.
Prabhupada si začal namáčať kúsky ovocia priamo do tej misky s soľou.
And then, eating.
A potom to jedol.
So when I cleaned up afterwards,
A keď som to po ňom umyl,
I left the salt bowl on the table,
tak som na tom stole nechal nádobu so soľou.
thinking that it'd be all right to use for the other meals.
Myslel som si, že to bude v poriadku, že to použijeme na ďalšie jedla.
So I was, cleaning up. I put the salt pot there and I'm cleaning.
Tak ja som to vyčistil, položil som tam tú misku so soľou a čistil som to tam.
Prabhupada was sitting at the back of the room with a couple of the sannyasis.
A A Prabhupada sedel na druhej strane izby s pár saniasinmi.
And he's talking with them
Rozprával sa s nimi.
and watching me.
Pozeral na mňa.
He had this ability to be able to see whatever was going on in the room, and he would see it all at the same time.
On mal túto schopnosť, že videl všetko, čo sa dialo v tej izbe a zároveň to všetko bol schopný odsledovať.
So as soon as he saw me leaving the salt pot there, he knew exactly what I was doing.
Takže hneď, keď videl, že som tam nechal tú nádobu so soľou, tak úplne ako hneď vedel, že čo robí.
He immediately stopped. He said, "What is this?" He said, "You are simply a yavana."
No a hovorí, čo je toto? Prestaň s tým, ty si jednoducho javana.
He said, then he complained about our Western habit of leaving food, the remnants of food,
A potom sa začal
or
sťažovať.
saving remnants of food.
Potom sa začal sťažovať na náš západný zvyk, že my odkladáme zvyšky ovocia.
He said, there's no taste, no vitamin, and still they eat it.
Hovorí, nie je tam ani chuť, ani vitamíny a oni to aj napriek tomu jedia.
They leave it in the fridge for 5 days. And then,
Necháte to v chladničke 5 dní.
Harisauri asked if it would be all right if I kept the salt in the pot.
No Harisauri sa spýtal, či by to bolo v poriadku, ak by som tu sol nechal v tom v nejakom malom hrnčiku na nádobe.
Then put some on the plate for Prabhupada to take with his prasadam.
A z tej nádoby dal trošku na Prabhupádov plate, aby si ho mohol použiť, keď bude s prasadám.
I do not know whether it is all right, Prabhupada said.
Prabhupada povedal, ja neviem, či je to v poriadku.
But it is not all right that you keep it and eat it. Eat and then keep it.
Ale nie je v poriadku, že jete a potom z toho jete a aj tak si to uchováte.
That is not all right.
To nie je v poriadku.
So Yasodhananda explained, well, he keeps the salt in a separate bowl. When you require it, it'll give you only as much as you require.
A potom niekto ďalší navrhol, že teda on si tú sol nechá v inej nádobke a keď budete nejakú potrebovať, tak vám dá presne toľko, koľko potrebujete. No a keď budete znova chcieť, tak vám znova dá.
So Prabhupada said, yes, that is nice.
Prabhupada povedal, áno, to je v poriadku.
So I explained, well, that's actually why I put the bowl there. That's why I put the bowl there.
No a ja som vysvetlil, to je dôvod, prečo som tam nechal tú misku.
That's what I intended to do, but I have to keep it away from the table.
A to je to, čo som aj chcel spraviť, ale teda mal som to nechať mimo toho stola.
So Prabhupada said the principle should be that you should not leave the remnants of food.
No, Prabhupada povedal, že princíp je, že by ste nemali nechávať zvyšky food or fruit.
Food.
Zvyšky jedla.
As soon as it is used,
A hneď ako sa to použije,
it should not be used more.
v tom momente, ako sa to použije, už by sa to znova nemalo používať.
Otherwise it is not possible to give up.
Inak to nie je možné, ako s tým prestať.
Param Drispanavatate. I'm eating something not very superior, but if I get the chance of eating something superior, then I can give up this inferior.
Takže nie je niečo vyššie, ale ak mám možnosť jesť niečo vyššie, tak potom sa môžem vzdať toho nižšieho.
So, I mean, in all our restaurants, everywhere in the West, you keep the salt pot there, same salt pot for weeks and months and years. You just top it up. People are eating, they grab the salt pot. Hands are dirty, they're eating, and then they put it down, and then it's left there for the next person and the next person.
Takže vidíte, ako to chodí vo všetkých reštauráciách, na stole je solnička a je to tam týždne, mesiace a roky a ľudia si to proste len posolia, keď sa to minie, tak to len doplnia a všetci to chytajú so špinavými rukami, teda s tými rukmi, s ktorými jedia.
And nobody thinks anything about it.
A nikoho ako nenapadne, že by s tým bolo niečo v neporiadku.
Anyway, so a few months later, August the 15th, 1976 in Bombay.
O pár mesiacov neskôr, 15. augusta 1976 v Bombaji.
In the afternoons, after Prabhupada had his nap,
A po obede, potom čo Prabhupada si oddychol, zdriemol,
we used to offer him a fresh garland.
tak sme mu ponúkali čerstvú girlandu.
And we'd also put some sandalwood paste on his forehead.
Tiež na jeho čelo sme aplikovali trošku santalovej pasty.
And then generally we would give him either a piece of fruit or some fruit juice.
A bežne sme mu dávali buď nejaké ovocie alebo ovocný džús.
So this particular day I offered Prabhupada a slice of watermelon.
A práve v tento deň som mu ponúkol kúsok červeného melónu.
So the melon was so big I just used one slice.
Melón bol veľmi veľký, preto som použil iba jeden výrez.
And put the rest in the fridge to save for later.
A zvyšok som dal do chladničky, že to odložíme na neskôr.
And of course, as soon as I opened the fridge door, Prabhupada walked right past, stopped.
Samozrejme, v tom momente, ako som otvoril dvere tej chladničky, tak práve tam išiel Prabhupada a zastavil sa.
And he just said, cut fruit must be distributed immediately.
A hovorí, rozkrajené ovocie musí byť i hneď distribuované.
So that was another lesson.
To bola ďalšia lekcia.
We all do it, right?
Všetci to robíme, nie je to tak? Vieme o tom.
But it should actually, as soon as it's cut, that's it, it should be out.
Ale v skutočnosti, hneď ako sa to rozkraje, tak by sa to malo rozdať.
So February the 7th, 1976, we're in Mayapur.
7. februára 1976 sme boli v Mayapure.
We had gotten there on the 17th of January. Tamal Krišna Maharaj was Prabhupada's secretary at that time.
Prišli sme tam 17. januára, v tej dobe bol Prabhupádovým sekretárom Tamal Krišna Maharaj.
And we got into a nice routine.
A vtedy už sme mali vybudovanú dobrú rutinu.
Yeah, it was, in those days Mayapur was very quiet.
A v tej dobe bol Mayapur veľmi tichý.
There was just the one building, the Lotus building.
V tej dobe tam bola iba tá Lotusová budova.
Yeah, 4-story building. Prabhupada was very happy with it. He had given the idea for the design himself.
A bola to štvorposchodová budova a Prabhupádovi sa veľmi páčila. On sám dal dizajn, ako by to malo vyzerať.
So he had designed it with very wide verandas that go all the way around each floor.
Takže on to nadizajnoval so veľmi širokými verandami, ktoré idú okolo každého poschodia.
Yeah, and the rooms, you know, there was a door on either side, so the breeze would blow right through.
A na každej strane sú dvere, aby Vánok mohol prejsť cez tú budovu.
So it was nice. No visitors practically, a few at the weekend, but in the weekday, nothing.
Prakticky tam neboli žiadne návštevníci, pár z nich cez víkend, ale cez pracovný deň iba málo kto.
And that would give us a chance, you know, to just sit with Srila Prabhupada and chat. He would talk about sometimes his childhood, sometimes he would talk about his pre-ISKCON preaching days, sometimes he would talk about the British Raj.
Že toto nám umožnilo si sadnúť s Prabhupádom a trošku sa tak podebatovať. Niekedy rozprával o svojich zábavách z detstva, niekedy o tom, ako to bolo predtým, ako bol ešte vybudovaný ISKCON, ako sa snažil kázať, a niekedy rozprával o britskom kráľovstve.
And, you know, this nice breeze blowing. When it got dark, of course in Mayapur the electricity would go off about 20 times a day.
Takže v tom Mayapure to bolo príjemné, keď ako išiel ten Vánok, viete, ako to je v tej dobe, ako elektrika vypadla v Mayapure tak 20 krát za deň.
And so we had these kerosene lanterns.
My sme mali tieto malé lampášiky petrolejové.
Yeah, so we'd light those when the power went off.
A my sme ich zapálili, keď elektrika proste vypadla.
This nice soft glow in the room.
A v izbe bola táto príjemná, taká mäkká žiara.
And we'd be sitting there, Prabhupada, very relaxed and chatting.
A my sme tam sedeli, Prabhupada bol opretý, veľmi uvoľnený a spieval.
And so another thing that we did was after lunch, immediately after eating, Prabhupada would not take rest immediately after eating, but after about 20 minutes.
Prabhupada, on si neoddychoval hneď, ako sa najedol, ale tak za takých 20 minút si išiel oddychnúť po jedle.
He would let, you know, the digestive juices start flowing, and, you know, generally he would chant a couple of rounds, and then he would go and take rest for an hour. Takže on proste nechal, aby tie žalúdočné šťavy sa naštartovali, pár kôl si občentoval a potom si na hodinu oddychol. But in Mayapur, because it was so nice, there was just all rice fields all around us, nothing else.
Ale pretože v Majapu bolo také krásne, všade navôkol boli iba ryžové polia.
So after eating, he would go and he would sit at the end of the veranda.
Takže potom, čo sa najedol, tak si sadol na konci tej verandy.
And you could look over the front gate and see the Ganges in the distance.
A cez vstupnú bránu videl, ako tečie Ganga.
And you know, he was doing this every day.
On toto robil každý deň.
So me and Tamal Krishna Maharaj, we would come and sit at his feet. Prabhupada would be sitting on a chair. And he would just, again, you know, some light talk.
Tamal Krišna Maharaj, ja sme sedeli pri jeho nohách, Prabhupada sedel na stoličke a teda viedol takú ľahkú debatu.
One day he told us that he'd had a dream previously, that previous night.
A jedného dňa nám povedal, že predchádzajúcu noc mal sen.
He had dreamed about a planet where pious Muslims go.
A že sa mu snívalo o planéte, na ktorej idú zbožní muslimovia.
So I was immediately curious.
A hneď som mal to záujem.
Yeah. For two reasons.
Z dvoch dôvodov.
Yeah, I asked him the first one, I said, is there such a place?
A prvú otázku som sa spýtal, existuje takéto miesto?
And Prabhupada said, oh yes.
Prabhupada povedal, áno.
Because I had a doubt whether there was such a thing as a pious Muslim, but I guess there is.
Pretože mal som pochybnosti o tom, či existuje zbožný muslim, ale tak očividne áno.
Because the Muslims are famous for being cow killers. So how you can be pious if you're a cow killer? Cow killer. Pretože
muslimi, oni sú známi tým, že zabíjajú kravy, tak som rozmýšľal nad tým, ako môžete byť zbožní, keď zabíjate kravy.
Anyway, so Prabhupada, it was like that kind of mood.
Takže takéto to bolo, bola to takáto nálada.
So I knew that Prabhupada would always, you know, have like a half a glass of water. After about 10 minutes, you know, once his digestion was running, then he would have a drink.
Takže asi po 10 minútach, keď už proste sa mu rozštartovalo trávenie, tak si dal trošku vody.
So every day I would bring a glass of water.
Každý deň sa priniesol pohár s vodou.
Just in case Prabhupada asked for it.
A v prípade, že Prabhupada požiadal.
So this particular day, sure enough, after a few minutes, Prabhupada said, give me the cup.
A konkrétne tento deň, istotne ako po pár minútach mi Prabhupada povedal, daj mi ten pohár.
So in my eagerness to serve him,
a v mojom nadšení mu slúžiť,
I moved too quick.
som sa pohol príliš rýchlo.
You know, I was a young, passionate wrestler.
Bol som mladý, vášnivý západiar.
So I went like this to get the glass.
A som sa proste takto pohol, aby som vzal ten pohár.
And I just hit the edge of it with the bottom of the palm of my hand.
A brúškom ruky som narazil do toho pohára.
So then I, you know, instinctively caught it.
A inštinktívne som to chytil.
And my fingers just went on the inside of the lip.
A môj nech išiel na okraj toho pohára.
Just the tip of my fingers touched the water.
Iba proste ten kraj môjho nechtu sa dotkol tej vody.
So then I was caught in a dilemma.
A teraz som bol chytený v dileme.
I was thinking now, if I pour the water out, then I have to go all the way down to the end of the veranda and get some fresh drinking water. Prabhupada will have to sit there and wait until I do that.
No, ja som nad tým rozmýšľal, no tak keď tú vodu budem chcieť vymeniť, tak budem musieť ísť ako na druhú stranu tej verandy, aby som tam načapovala nejakú čerstvú vodu a Prabhupada tu bude musieť ako čakať dovtedy.
But if I give him the glass now, my fingers touch the water.
Ale ak by som mu dal tú vodu, tak moje nechty sa toho dotkli.
So it was like picking the lesser of two evils.
Takže musel som vybrať to menšie zlo.
So I made a decision, all right, I offered him the glass.
Tak som sa rozhodol, v poriadku, ponúknem mu ten pohár.
Wrong decision.
Nesprávne rozhodnutie.
Prabhupada just shook his head and gave me a sour look.
Prabhupada zatriasol hlavu a kyslo sa na mňa pozeral.
Then he quoted from the Bhagavad Gita.
Potom citoval z Bhagavad Gity.
Pravitancha nirvitancha janana vido asura. It was simply a malacha.
Jednoducho ste iba mláčovia.
You know the verse, right? The asuras. Yeah. They don't know what is to be done and what is not to be done.
Takže poznáte ten verš hovorí, že Asurovia nevedia, čo je správne a čo nie je
No
správne.
cleanliness, no truthfulness, no good qualities are to be found in them.
V nich nenájdete žiadnu čistotu, žiadnu pravdobradnosť a žiadne dobré vlastnosti.
So, in an attempt to rectify my bad habits,
A v snahe napraviť moje zlozvyky,
I've begun to take 3 baths daily.
som sa začal sprchovať 3-krát denne.
One upon rising, one just before massage, and one in the late afternoon.
Takže jeden kúpel, keď som sa zobudil, druhý pred tým, ako som ho išiel masírovať a tretí po obede.
Still, it seems very difficult to know what a fitting standard of cleanliness actually is.
A stále sa mi zdalo, že je to príliš náročné pochopiť, čo je ten vhodný štandard čistoty.
Although due to Prabhupada's association, I'm gradually learning.
Aj keď ako vďaka Prabhupádovej spoločnosti sa postupne to učím.
The other evening, I told Prabhupada that sometimes I wonder if I'll ever come up to the correct standard of cleanliness.
A ďalší večer som povedal Prabhupádovi, že teda nie som si istý, či niekedy prídem na tú úroveň správneho štandardu čistoty.
I told him that Brahminical cleanliness just doesn't seem to come naturally.
Hovorím, že proste mne sa vôbec nezdá, že brahmanická čistotnosť prichádza tak ako sama od seba.
I explained that at home, because I was brought up in England, northern England.
A ja som mu vysvetlil, že doma ja som vyrastal v severnom Anglicku.
So before becoming a devotee,
Že predtým, ako som sa stal oddaným,
I had been practiced to bathe not more than once a week.
som sa sprechovával tak ako maximálne raz za týždeň.
That was the standard in my family.
To bol štandard v mojej rodine.
Friday night was bath night.
Piatok večer sme sa kúpali.
It was 4 kids, I was the youngest.
Ale 4 deti, ja som bol to najmladšie.
And in England, you know, it's because it's cold and miserable all the time. Nobody likes bathing.
V Anglicku, pretože je tam zima a stále je tam škaredé, nikto sa tam nerad kúpa.
So my mum on a Friday night, she would, because that was the end of the school week, right?
A moja mama každý piatok večer, pretože to bol posledný deň školy v tom
So,
týždni.
you know, during the week we got all dirty and filthy and everything. So.
Takže cez týždeň sme sa zašpinili, zavšívali.
So then she would fill the bath up, and then my elder brother would go in, he would bathe, he would come out.
Mama naplnila tú páňu. Môj starší brat sa tam vykúpal, vyšiel.
Then my second brother, he would go in.
Potom sa tam vykúpal môj druhý brat.
Then she would empty the tub out, fill it up again.
A potom ona vypustila to vaňu, znova tam
Then my sister would bathe.
A potom sa vykúpala moja
She'd
sestra.
come out, then I would go in.
Keď vyšla, tak ja som sa vykúpal.
So like that. That was, you know, when we were smaller, but we never got out of the habit, of course.
Takže to bolo, keď sme boli mali, ale očividne ako nikdy sme z toho zvyku nejak ako sa nezmenili, sme ho nasledovali.
It wasn't till I was 20 when I emigrated to Australia and we were working on the mining camps that I started bathing every day.
Takže až keď som nemal 20 rokov, keď som emigroval do Austrálie, tak tam v tých pracovných kempoch som sa začal pravidelne sprchovať.
Then of course after that I became a devotee.
A potom som sa
I mean, I
stal
tried
oddaným.
to become a devotee.
Potom som sa snažil stať sa oddaným.
Anyway, so I told Prabhupada all this.
Tak som to všetko povedal Prabhupádovi.
So Prabhupada assured me that I will learn gradually.
Takže Prabhupád ma uistil, že postupne sa to naučím.
But he also laughingly agreed that for a Westerner to be clean is somehow a very artificial condition.
Tiež súhlasil s tým, že pre západniara byť čistý je veľmi umelý stav.
Okay, so Kids and cleanliness. That's another item.
Deti a čistota, to je ďalšia téma.
And especially, you know, in connection with food as well. Food and cleanliness, that's, you know, they're knit together.
Samozrejme aj vo vzťahu jedla a čistoty, ako to ide spolu.
So there was one incident that happened in Hyderabad at the end of 1976.
Na konci roka 1976 sa stala jedna vec v Hyderabade.
That time Prabhupada had gone down at the beginning of December. There was a huge tract of land, about 250 hectares.
Takže v tej dobe tam bol obrovský pozemok, 220 hektárov.
250.
A 250 hektárov.
And that had been given to ISKCON.
A tento pozemok bol darovaný ISKCONu.
And it took about a year for them to figure out they had to make a new trust and transfer it to the trust.
Takže asi rok im to trvalo, kým zistili, ako založiť jeden spolok a transferovať to do druhého spolku.
So just at the beginning of December, Mahamsa told Prabhupada, now we're ready to sign.
Takže práve na začiatku decembra povedal Mahamsa Prabhupádovi, teraz sme pripravení to podpísať.
So we left Vrindavan on December the 2nd.
Z Vrindavanu sme odišli 10. decembra, 2. decembra.
As Prabhupada got into the car,
A ako Prabhupád nastúpil do auta,
he said, now we are going to start a new phase of this movement.
teraz začneme novú tvár tohto hnutia.
And then he didn't say anything more.
A už nič viac nepovedal.
So Jagadish said, well, what is that, Srila Prabhupada?
A Jagadish hovorí, nož, šla Prabhupád, a čo to bude?
And Prabhupada said, Varnashram.
Prabhupád povedal Varnashrama.
So that was his intention. So he spent 2.5 weeks there.
A to bol jeho zámer, strávil tam 2,5 týždňa.
And his basic plan was that, you know, we had all this land.
A jeho základný plán bol, že mali sme celý tento pozemok.
He was going to attract all the local villagers to come.
On chcel pritiahnuť všetkých miestnych dedinčanov, aby tam prišli.
Because they're all farmers.
Pretože všetko boli poľnohospodári.
So he wanted to have a pandal program going on every day, every evening.
Takže chcel, aby každý večer tam prebiehal pandalový program.
And then we do some chanting and distribute prasadam.
A potom sme spievali a distribuovali prasadam.
And in that way then, you know, attract the local people.
Takýmto spôsobom sme mali pritiahnuť miestnych obyvateľov.
Start to preach to them a little bit.
Trošku im začať kázať.
And then if they got really interested, invite them to come and live on our land.
A ak by mali skutočne záujem, tak by sme ich pozvali, aby žili s nami na tom pozemku.
And they could be given to, you know, 2 or 3 acres of land to farm.
A dali by sme im 2-3 akre, aby tam mohli poľnohospodáriť.
And Prabhupada's idea was that in different places on the farm, you'd have little groups of people, like maybe 10 or 12 houses.
A Prabhupád to chcel tak, že na každom tom kúsku toho pozemku by bolo pár ľudí, ktorí by tam žilo, takých 12 párov.
And in each little group they'd have a small temple.
A v každej tejto skupinke by bol malý chrám.
And they'd have, you know, whatever deity attracted them, you know, as long as there's a Vishnu deity, of course.
A mohli by tam mať akékoľvek božstvo, ktoré ich priťahovalo, samozrejme pokiaľ je to Vishnu božstvo.
So Lakshmi Narayan, Radha Krishna, Balaji, like that.
Takže Lakshmi, Narayan, Radha Krishna, Balaji a tak ďalej.
Yeah. So, you know, the idea was that they get up in the morning, they do a little, you know, puja and chanting. Then they spend the rest of the day working the land.
Takže malo to byť tak myslené, že ráno vstanú, spravia trošku púže, zvyšok dňa strávia tým, že budú pracovať na tej pôde.
And then at the end of the day, they come back together again and do more kirtan.
A na konci dňa sa znova spolu stretnú a budú robiť ešte viac kirtanu.
So that was it. That was the whole scheme. Very simple, not complicated. The point was they would continue on with the same activities that they were already doing, but now they would do it as devotees.
Takže to bola, tá schéma je veľmi jednoduchá, že budú pokračovať v tom, čo už robia, ale teraz to budú robiť ako oddaní.
Anyway, so as I said, we were there for about 2.5 weeks.
Boli sme tam asi 2,5 týždňa.
And at that time, on Prabhupada's party, it was quite, there were a number of us actually.
A v tej dobe v tej skupinke s Prabhupádom nás bolo niekoľko.
Jagadish was the secretary.
Jagadish bol sekretár,
Because I was the servant.
ja som bol služobník.
And we had Pradyumna, his wife and his child on the party as well.
A ešte s nami bol aj Pradyumna s manželkou a s dieťaťom.
So Pradyumna was Prabhupada's Sanskrit secretary,
Takže
or editor.
Pradyumna bol Prabhupádov editor sanskritu.
And he had joined the party, or kind of rejoined the party, in May of 1976.
A on sa znovu k nám pripojil v máji 1976,
when we were in Hawaii.
keď sme boli na Havaji.
And then from there we went to LA,
Odtiaľ sme išli do Los Angeles.
and his wife and son were there.
Bolo tam aj jeho manželka so synom.
And Aniruddha, the boy, he was 6 years old.
A Aniruddha, ten chlapec mal 6 rokov.
So he was in the Los Angeles Gurukul.
Takže on bol v Los Angeleskej Gurukule.
Then from there we traveled on Detroit, Toronto, then we came down to New Brindavan.
Takže odtiaľ sme cestovali do Detroitu, Toronto a išli sme dolu do Nového Vrindavanu.
And then Arundhati turned up in New Brindavan. That was Pradyumna's wife.
Arundhati? Arundhati, Pradyumnova manželka, sa tam pripojila k nám.
And she was complaining, and Pradyumna was complaining the boy wasn't getting educated properly.
No oni sa sťažovali, že ten chlapec nezískava adekvátne vzdelanie.
So they didn't want to leave him in the Gurukul, they wanted to do like a homeschooling.
Preto oni chceli nechať v Gurukule, ale chceli ho učiť z domu.
And at the same time, Pushta Krishna Swami, who was the secretary at that time, was having a bit of a personal crisis.
V tej dobe Pushta Krishna Swami mal osobnú krízu.
And he had been transcribing Prabhupada's nightly dictations on the Bhagavatam.
A on prepisoval Prabhupádove nočné diktovanie Šrimad Bhagavatamu.
So he was kind of overwhelmed.
A bolo to na ňo priveľa.
And when Arundhati turned up,
A keď tam prišla Arundhati,
then he felt it was better that she take over that service.
tak mal pocit, že by bolo lepšie, keby ona prebrala tú službu.
Because she was very experienced, she'd been doing it for years.
Ona bola veľmi skúsená, robila to už roky.
So Prabhupada agreed.
Prabhupada s tým súhlasil.
So the whole family was travelling with Prabhupada from that time onwards.
Takže od tej doby celá rodina cestovala s Prabhupádom.
And of course they remained with him up until Prabhupada's disappearance.
A samozrejme zostali s ním až dovtedy, kým opustil túto planetu.
Anyway, so Aniruddha, he was in a very unique position.
A samozrejme Aniruddha mal veľmi špeciálne postavenie.
A little 6-year-old kid travelling with Prabhupada all over the world.
Bolo to malé 6-ročné dieťa, ktoré cestovalo s Prabhupádom po celom svete.
And Prabhupada was happy with that arrangement.
A Prabhupádovi sa to páčilo.
But one of the difficulties, of course, was that he would never really get to play with any other kids.
Ale jeden z problémov bol, že nikdy nemal možnosť sa hrať s inými deťmi.
Yeah, because we were always travelling.
Pretože sme neustále cestovali.
So mid-December, December the 16th, then we were in Hyderabad on the farm.
16. decembra sme boli v Hyderabade na farme.
And this morning I saw Aniruddha, Arundhati's son.
A toto ráno som videl Aniruddhu a Arundhatiho syna,
And he's running across the yard with a puppy in his arms.
ako uteká cez dvor a v náručí drží šteniatko.
Yeah. So, you know, it's just some wild dog that he found, some puppies. He got very excited, he picked it up and he's running around with this little dog in his arms.
Takže viete, bol to len nejaký ako divoký pes, niekde našiel nejaké malé šteniatka a on si ho vzal a utekal s ním v náručí.
So I shouted to him, put it down, it's dirty.
Tak som na ňo zakričal, daj ho dolu, daj ho preč, on je špinavý.
And he just laughed and ran off with it, you know.
A on ho tam nechal a utekol odtiaľ.
So later on, he came to the kitchen at Prabhupada's house,
A neskôr prešiel do kuchyne Prabhupádového domu,
where his mother was preparing Prabhupada's lunch.
kde jeho matka pripravovala Prabhupádov obed.
So Prabhupada had finished bathing and he was sitting in his darshan room, ready to take his meal.
Takže Prabhupád práve skončil svoje kúpanie a sedel v izbe na daršany, kde bol pripravený sa najesť.
So it was a special treat.
Takže Takže bolo to špeciálne.
Arundhati gave Prabhupada's plate to Aniruddha to carry into it.
Bola to špeciálna situácia. Arundhati dala Aniruddhovi, svojmu malému synovi, tanier, aby ho odniesol Prabhupadovi.
I saw that he was wearing the same clothes that he had on in the morning when he was carrying the dog.
A ja som videl, že mal oblečené to isté na sebe, čo mal aj ráno, keď niesol toho psa.
So I went into the kitchen and I told Arundhati off for allowing him into the kitchen.
No ja som prišiel do tej kuchyne a dohovoril som Arundhati za to, že mu dovolila ísť do tej kuchyne.
And for handling Prabhupada's plate.
A to, že teda ešte ako zaobchádza s tým Prabhupadovým tanierom.
Because it could not be guaranteed that he was clean.
Pretože nebolo zaručené, že je čistý.
She was also giving him things to eat inside the kitchen.
Tiež mu dávala veci, ktoré akože jedol v kuchyni.
She was giving him stuff to eat and he was sitting in the kitchen. Yeah. So an argument developed.
Takže začala sa hádka.
With her getting very upset.
Ona bola veľmi nahnevaná.
And bursting into tears.
A začala plakať.
And angrily threatening that unless he could come into the kitchen to be with her, then she wasn't going to cook anymore.
A ona sa vyhrážala, že pokiaľ s ňou nebude môcť byť v tej kuchyni, tak už nebude variť.
This made me even more agitated.
Mňa to ešte viacej rozdraždilo.
That she could take her service to Srila Prabhupada so cheaply.
Že takto lacno zaobchádza so službou Šrilovi Prabhupadovi.
So we were going at it. I was getting angry and yelling at her. She was yelling back.
Takže sa to tak ako rozjíždialo. Ja som sa viac a viac hneval a som na ňu vrieskal, ona naspäť na mňa.
So of course Prabhupada was in the next room just through the door.
Samozrejme Prabhupada bol vo vedľajšej izbe, boli tam medzi nami iba dvere.
And he heard all the commotion.
A on to celé počul.
So he called me through to ask what was going on.
Tak ma zavolal, aby sa spýtal, čo sa deje.
So I explained about Aniruddha and the dog.
Tak som vysvetlil o Aniruddhovi a psovi.
And my objection.
A o moje námietky.
And Arundhati's refusal to comply.
A Arundhati nám odpor voči tomu, že by ako spolu sa tomu podriedila.
So rather than call her in, Prabhupada got up and went into the kitchen to talk to her.
Tak namiesto toho, aby ju zavolal, tak Prabhupada vstal a išiel do kuchyne, aby sa s ňou porozprával.
He asked Aniruddha, have you been carrying a dog?
Spýtal sa Aniruddhu, niesol si psa?
Which he honestly admitted that he had.
A on úprimne prisvedčil, že ho niesol.
So Arundhati told Srila Prabhupada that she had made him wash his hands before handling the plate.
A Arundhati povedala Šrilovi Prabhupadovi, že ona ho prinútila, aby si umyl ruky predtým, ako mu dala ten tanier.
So after hearing both sides,
Takže potom, čo si vypočul obe strany,
Prabhupada explained to her in a very kindly way
jej Prabhupada veľmi láskavo vysvetlil,
that actually it was a fact that the boy should not come into the kitchen.
že je to skutočno, že ten chlapec by nemal ísť do tej kuchyne.
Because he is young and it is not possible for him to remain clean.
Pretože je mladý a pre ňa nie je možné, aby zostal čistý.
He told her, one should take bath before entering the kitchen.
A povedali jej, človek by sa mal vykúpať predtým, ako vstúpi do kuchyne.
Just as the deity room also.
A rovnako ako do chrámovej miestnosti.
These two places are to be kept very, very clean.
Tieto dve miesta by mali byť udržované veľmi, veľmi čisté.
These rules must be observed.
A musíte dodržovať tieto pravidlá.
They are there so that we can avoid seva aparad.
A tieto pravidlá sú tu preto, aby sme sa vyhli seva aparátu.
So Arundhati accepted that.
Arundhati to prijala.
But still she said, Aniruddha wanted to be with her while she was cooking.
Ale aj tak povedala, že Aniruddha s ňou chce byť, pokiaľ varí.
And she also needed to know where he was while she was cooking.
A tiež ona potrebovala vedieť, kde on je, keď varila.
And he also gets hungry at around that time and needs to be fed.
A tiež ako v tej dobe on je hladný a potrebuje byť nakrmený.
So Prabhupada intelligently gave the solution.
Že Prabhupada dal inteligentné riešenie.
If it was not possible for them to be separated, he said,
Ak pre nich nie je možné, aby boli oddelení,
then Aniruddha can remain just outside the door on the back veranda.
tak Aniruddha môže zostať hneď ako za dvermi na verande.
He may not come in,
Ale nesmie poísť,
but he can still see his mother.
ale stále môže vidieť svoju matku.
And she can instruct him.
Ona mu môže dávať pokyny.
And if he wants something to eat, he can be given that just outside the door.
Ak chce niečo jesť, tak mu to môže dať pred dverami.
He told her that attachment between a mother and son is natural.
Povedal jej, že pripútanosť medzi matkou a synom je prirodzená.
But there is also the question of training.
Ale tiež je tu otázka tréningu.
So she calmed down.
Tak sa ukludnila
Accepting Prabhupada's advice as a good solution.
a prijala Prabhupadovu radu ako dobré riešenie.
And she ended up smiling again.
A znovu sa usmievala.
I was also happy to have Prabhupada's backing on a strong stand that I had taken.
A ja som tiež bol šťastný, že Prabhupada ma podporil ohľadne toho silného štandardu, ktorý som tam ako prezentoval.
So Prabhupada was able to satisfy all the parties.
Takže Prabhupada bol schopný uspokojiť všetky zúčastnené strany.
Then going back into his room,
A potom, keď sa vrátil do izby,
Prabhupada called me in
tak ma zavolal
and he added an extra piece of advice.
a ešte pridal ďalšiu časť rady.
He said, as a matter of etiquette,
Čo sa týka etikety,
if I have some instruction to give her,
ak mám nejaký pokyn, ktorý jej chcem dať,
it should be through her husband or through himself.
tak by, ak on akože má nejaký pokyn, ktorý chce dať ako jej, ako žene, tak to má spraviť buď cez jej manžela, alebo cez Šrilu Prabhupadu.
But I should not directly approach her.
Ale nemal by som priamo k nej pristupovať.
So again, Prabhupada's being a little diplomatic there,
Takže znova aj tu bol Prabhupada diplomatický.
rather than telling me you're just too heavy.
Čiže namiesto toho, aby mi povedal, si príliš heavy,
He just said, no, you say it to me or to Pradumna.
tak povedz radšej mne alebo Pradumnovi.
So I learned one other striking lesson from this event.
Takže z tohto incidentu som sa naučila ako jednu takú významnú lekciu.
How material attachment causes one to lose one's intelligence and good discrimination.
Ako hmotná pripútanosť núti človeka, aby strátil inteligenciu a správne rozlišovanie.
And puts one in a position whereby one commits offences.
A ešte aj človeka dáva do pozície, z ktorej robí priestupky.
Arundhati knew that it was wrong to allow her son into the kitchen.
A Arundhati vedela, že nie je správne dovoliť jej synovi, aby vstupoval do kuchyne.
But because of her identifying, oh, this is my son,
Ale pretože ona sa s ním identifikovala, toto je môj syn,
she insisted that he be allowed in.
tak trvala na tom, aby mu to bolo dovolené.
Even to the point of threatening to give up the personal service of a spiritual master.
Dokonca až do toho bodu, že sa vyhrážala s tým, že sa vzdá služby svojmu duchovnému učiteľovi.
Such is the power of Maya.